At 0700, hours on the frigid morning of December 27, 1944, Flight Officer Robert Mitchell shivered in the unheated plywood and fabric shell of his Waco CG-4A glider. The airfield in France was a grey, frozen expanse. Through the plexiglass nose, he watched the ground crews, their breath pluming white, meticulously wedging wooden crates behind him. These weren't medical supplies this time. They were high-explosive ammunition, 88mm and artillery shells, machine gun belts and mortar rounds. The metallic clanging as the crates were loaded seemed unnaturally loud in the early morning quiet. Mitchell, a 24-year-old Iowa farm boy, was acutely aware of his lack of experience. 15 training flights, 0 combat missions. The air hung heavy, with the knowledge of yesterday's cost, a deadly toll of 5 tow planes and 17 gliders lost to the concentrated German 80mm and flak, batteries ringing the approaches to Bastogne. The memory of the intelligence officer's grim smile during the briefing, detailing the registered target zone, fueled a knot of anxiety in Mitchell's stomach. The CG-4A, a skeletal construct of fabric-covered metal tubing and a plywood floor, offered 0 protection. No armor, no engine to power an escape, and, by grim order, no parachute. Empty, the glider weighed $3,900 loaded now with 3 tons of high explosives. Its gross weight was a terrifying $9,000. The unofficial names felt appropriate. Flying coffin, tow, target, plywood hearse. Mitchell's orders were a stark suicide note. Ride a 300-foot nylon rope behind a Douglas C-47 Skytrain through the flak corridor, cut loose at 600 feet, and glide into the American perimeter surrounded by enemy forces, delivering the desperately needed ammunition to the 101st Airborne Division trapped in Bastogne 7 days prior. Hitler's final offensive in the West, the Battle of the Bulge, had punched a 60-mile dent in the Allied lines. The screaming eagles of the 101st were encircled in Bastogne, the crucial crossroads town with 7 major highways converging at its center. 11,000 paratroopers were isolated, running critically low on everything. General McAuliffe's infamous one-word reply to the German surrender demand, "Nuts," was famous. But defiance didn't stop the cold or reload a weapon. The situation was dire. The field hospital was gone. 42 medics were captured. Remaining doctors were performing surgery with kitchen knives and bed sheets. Artillery shells were severely rationed. Soldiers were down to a grim average of 10 rounds per rifle. For 6 days, foul weather had grounded all flights. The brief clear window yesterday, December 26th, allowed 11 gliders to bring in surgeons, but today the mission was purely lethal. 3,000 pounds of explosives per glider, 50 gliders dispatched. The target, the same killing zone the Germans had perfectly registered. The mission briefing had been unnerving. The entire approach route was mapped by German flak crews. 88mm cannons and quad-mounted 20mm guns covered every coordinate. The flight path went directly over enemy positions because no other way existed. The C-47 pilots would climb to $6,000 feet, then execute a shallow dive to $600 feet for release, ensuring a maximum 4 minutes of exposure time in the worst of the flak zone. The glider pilots would be on their own from 8 miles out. The squadron commander's grim decision weighed. On every man, no co-pilots. The explosive cargo was too risky. If flak found a glider, both pilots would die. Better to risk 1 trained pilot than 2. Mitchell would fly alone. 50 gliders, 50 pilots, all volunteers, all knowing the training prediction, 50%. Casualties. Mitchell checked his watch. 45. Take off in 15 minutes. He looked back at the tall stacks of wooden crates. High explosives, artillery shells, mortar rounds. A single tracer round through the fuselage, and he would vaporize. He had written a letter to his mother the night before, sealed and left on his bunk. Just in case, the tow rope tightened, a 50-foot nylon lifeline. Mitchell gripped the control stick. 800 hours. The C-47's engines roared. The rope snapped tight, and the glider lurched. No brakes, no throttle, only momentum and physics pulling the wooden shell down the frozen runway. At 85 mph, the glider lifted off. Mitchell pulled back gently on the stick, matching the C-47's climb angle. The rope stayed taut. One wrong move, a snap, a stall meant certain death. Behind Mitchell's CG-4A, 49 more gliders rose in a steady stream. The combined effort of the 439th and 440th troop carrier groups, 50 gliders, 50 pilots, 150 tons of ammunition. It was the largest glider resupply mission of the war. Mitchell settled into the constant, nerve-wracking rhythm of formation, flying. $6,000, feet up, $120. The glider had to stay precisely $200 feet below and behind the C-47, too high, and the rope would yank the tow plane's tail down. Too low and the glider would lose lift and fall. His hands stayed light, making tiny, constant corrections. The monotony of the long tow was broken only by the screaming vibration of the taut nylon tow rope running through. The cold air, at 0920, the lead C-47 crossed into German-held territory. The first flak appeared 8 miles from Bastogne, black puffs of 88 meters of smoke blooming at $5,000 feet. The sound arrived seconds later, a deep, percussive crump that vibrated the entire airframe. The German gunners were ranging. The C-47 pilots couldn't maneuver. Any turn would tangle or snap the ropes. A shell burst 200 feet to Mitchell's left. The blast wave hammered the light aircraft, and shrapnel tore through the fabric near the tail. Mitchell felt the control stick shudder and a sudden, unwelcome draft of cold air as a piece of shrapnel ripped a hole behind his seat. The rudder was sluggish but functional. He held course. A burst, 100 feet ahead, filled the air with smoke. Mitchell flew through it blind for 3 agonizing seconds. The smell of burnt powder and ozone was overwhelming. When he emerged, the glider directly in front of him was trailing smoke, its left wing shredded. The pilot was fighting, but the glider peeled away, descending rapidly. Mitchell didn't look down. He focused on the tow plane, trying to mentally block the image of the crippled glider falling into German territory. Then came the direct hit. Mitchell saw a C-47 erupt in flames, its left engine gone. The tow plane's crew bailed out, 4 parachutes, just as the engine fire spread. The glider being towed cut loose, plunging in a vertical dive. It hit the ground, detonating in a colossal pillar of orange flame and black smoke. 2 gliders, 1 C-47 down, the flak intensified. 20-meter traces streaked up like fiery ropes. The sound was distinct now. The pop, 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 pop of the anti-aircraft. Cannons followed by the whiz of the rounds. Passing through the air near them, Mitchell heard a sickening sound of tearing metal behind him. Another glider hit. He didn't look back. He could only focus on the C-47 pulling him, which now began to smoke from a strike. Yet the pilot stubbornly held formation. 3 miles from Bastogne, the flak was so thick Mitchell could smell the sharp, acrid cordite through the holes in his fuselage. Another glider exploded directly to his left, a mid-air detonation of its cargo. The force of the explosion was physical, like being punched in the side. Mitchell felt the shockwave, an intense heat of the blast, through his cockpit window, and debris peppered his right wing. 2 miles. The C-40 began the dive 6,000 feet down to 600 feet at a 30-degree angle. The tow rope went momentarily slack and snapped tight as Mitchell's glider accelerated to keep up. This was the moment of maximum vulnerability. Flying through the heaviest concentration of fire at the lowest altitude, 1 mile. The release light flashed red. Mitchell pulled the tow rope release. The rope snapped away, whipping back momentarily. The C-47 banked hard and climbed, leaving Mitchell instantly alone. At 600 feet, 1 mile from the landing zone, with only 60 seconds of flight time remaining, he faced a wall of incoming tracers. Mitchell dropped the nose, aiming for a snow-covered field north of town. American soldiers waved orange panels to mark the perimeter. The field was a patch of white, surrounded by dark, cratered earth and the skeletal outlines of shelled trees. 500 feet. German 20mm tracers arced up from positions just 400 yards east. The glider's controls were already damaged, but he held the approach steady, 45 degrees nose down. $60 pitched. The ground fire was close enough that he could hear the snap of rounds passing through. The air around the thin fuselage 400 feet. A tracer punched clean through his right wing, snapping a wooden rib with a sharp crack. The glider yawed violently right. He fought it with the left rudder, muscles straining. He had to land before the structure failed. 100 feet. He pulled back hard on the stick to flare, bringing the nose up and slowing the descent. 50 feet. He was too fast. The landing gear hit the frozen, cratered ground at 17 pt. The damaged right strut buckled instantly with a sickening tear of wood. The wing dropped, tearing off an 8-foot section. The fuselage skidded violently sideways across the snow and frozen earth. Mitchell's body was thrown against the safety harness as the tail section broke away. The wooden frame disintegrated around him in a cacophony of splintering wood and rending fabric. Then silence. The glider stopped. Mitchell was alive. The ammunition hadn't exploded. He scrambled out of the wreckage, his body shaking uncontrollably. A sergeant, his uniform mud-caked and his face hidden by a week's growth of beard, reached the cockpit first, yanking the door open. "Can you move, pilot?" "Good. Medic's that way. We'll unload the cargo." The sergeant didn't wait for a reply, immediately focusing on the rear of the shattered glider. Mitchell staggered toward the designated area. The landing zone was pure chaos. Of the 50 gliders dispatched, 32 landed inside the perimeter. He saw one glider that had overshot and slammed into a stone wall, the pilot instantly killed. Another had landed in a visible minefield, the impact triggering several explosions that scattered ammunition and wounded 3 soldiers, who ran in to retrieve mortar shells. A lieutenant from the 502nd Parachute Infantry, looking closer to 18 than his reported age, stopped him. His eyes were shadowed with fatigue, but his handshake was firm. "You one of the glider pilots? We were down to 8 rounds per man this morning." "Down to 8. You just gave us 50, thank you." The lieutenant's genuine, raw gratitude momentarily stunned Mitchell. The ammunition was through. The 101st Airborne could keep fighting. But the war wasn't over for Robert Mitchell. Glider pilots didn't just deliver cargo. Once they landed, they became Infantry Mitchell, who had only fired a rifle during basic training 18 months ago, was now standing in a freezing perimeter with a borrowed M1 Garand and 40 rounds of ammunition. A captain from the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment assigned him to a rifle company holding the northern edge of town, a sector down to 93 men from its original. 140, his partner was Corporal Hansen, a paratrooper from the 501st, a man whose weary eyes held the deep, cold knowledge of 3 campaigns. Hansen eyed Mitchell's clean, albeit torn, flight suit with professional skepticism. "You know how to use that rifle?" "And I mean use it when the noise starts." Mitchell nodded, his voice thin. "I qualified marksman," Hansen grunted. "This ain't qualification, kid. This is keeping your hole in the next guy's hole from filling up with Germans." The foxhole was a 4-by-6 foot pit lined with meager pine branches. It was not enough to stop the pervasive cold. The temperature was dropping toward 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Mitchell could feel the cold seeping through the soles of his boots. Hansen taught him the survival tricks, constant movement of toes and fingers to avoid frostbite and trench. Foot. Night fell at 1700. The darkness was absolute and heavy. At 1930, the German artillery opened up. The 80mm barrage was relentless. Mitchell pressed his body against the frozen earth as shrapnel tore the air above them, sounding like a pack of starving dogs howling past. The explosions were concussive, vibrating the ground and filling the air with the smell of sulfur and smoke. Hansen remained impassive, only speaking to warn. "Keep your head down." They walk them across the line. They're trying to hit the command. Post 2 holes over. At L100 on December 28th, the German infantry began to probe. Mitchell heard them first, the distinct crunch of boots on frozen snow, the rattle of equipment. Hansen whispered, his voice dangerously low. "Wait for the flare. Don't waste a round." A mortar shell arched up, bursting into a brilliant white illumination flare. In the blinding light, Mitchell saw them, 15 German soldiers advancing in a ragged skirmish line. Hansen opened fire with precise, rapid shots. The entire company followed. The firefight was short and brutal. 4 German soldiers dropped in the snow before the rest withdrew. Hansen reloaded, his eyes scanning the darkness. "They'll try again in an hour." Same thing every night. They probe, we shoot. They pull back. Then they shell us. They think we'll break eventually. He lit a cigarette beneath a scavenged poncho. "And they're not wrong. We're running out of men. You're a pilot, but you're better than a replacement. You can shoot straight." Mitchell spent 3 days in that foxhole. December 28th, 29th, and 30th, the cycle repeating exactly. The German pressure intensified despite the successful resupply. The cold became a greater enemy than the Germans. With the temperature dropping to near zero on December 31st, New Year's Eve, the weather broke again. The skies cleared, allowing the P-47 Thunderbolts to finally provide air support, strafing German positions. This brief respite was a dangerous illusion. On January 3rd, 1945, the Germans launched a massive, concentrated effort to reclaim the roads leading into Bastogne. The enemy wasn't probing tonight. They were attacking in force. At 0300 hours, the artillery opened up, heavier than any barrage Mitchell had yet endured. It was a sustained 20-minute maelstrom of high explosives, targeting the entire northern perimeter. The ground shook so violently that the sides of the foxhole began to collapse inward. Hansen yelled over the explosions, "Stay small! This isn't a probe! Get ready to use that bayonet!" When the shelling lifted, the silence was deafening, a terrifying prelude. Then came the unmistakable sound of shouting, heavy boots and the clatter of metal. "The German infantry was advancing rapidly. Here they come!" Hansen shouted. Mitchell peered over the lip of the foxhole. Instead of a skirmish line, it was a dense wave of grey figures, using the craters for cover, less than 100 yards away. Mitchell leveled his M1. He wasn't thinking about flying or training. He was only focused on the silhouette of the man in his sights. The American lines erupted. Mitchell squeezed the trigger, the M1 bucking against his shoulder. The sound of his own rifle firing in combat was shockingly loud and personal. He watched his target fall. He fired again, cycling the heavy rifle. The air was thick with the crisscrossing streams of tracer fire, smoke, and the muzzle flashes of M1s and German MP-40 submachine guns. German soldier, armed with a stick grenade, got within 30 yards of their position. Hansen dropped him with 2 quick shots. The explosive ping of the M1 clip. Ejecting moments later, the combat was brutal and close. The Germans momentarily broke through the sector 2 foxholes to the left. Mitchell heard a burst of screaming, quickly cut short, followed by the sound of furious hand-to-hand fighting. Hansen, covering Mitchell while he reloaded, yelled for a flanking counterfire. The battle raged for 45 minutes. The 101st held. As dawn broke, they surveyed the field. Dozens of German bodies lay frozen in the snow, the evidence of a failed, desperate assault. Mitchell's section alone had repelled over 2 companies. Mitchell looked at his M1. The barrel was smoking. He had fired every round from his bandolier. He looked at Hansen, who was cleaning his rifle with a piece of cloth. His movements deliberate and practiced. "You did good, pilot," Hansen said, his voice flat with fatigue. "You held the line." Mitchell nodded, but he didn't feel like a hero. He felt cold, exhausted, and fundamentally changed. He had delivered the ammunition, but in doing so, he had become the defender of that delivery. The war for Robert. Mitchell had changed completely. He was no longer waiting for a tow plane to return him to base. He was waiting for the next German attack. Rifle in hand, in a hole in the frozen Belgian earth. He would remain with the 101st until January 18th, when the siege was fully and finally broken. fighting with the infantry he had once only supplied.